name is Jared O'Brien, and welcome to the first week of Christians Engaging Culture. Christians Engaging Culture exists to help equip the people of St. Thomas's to share the gospel with people, even as we engage in often controversial issues that our society faces. In this first week of Christians Engaging Culture, we're looking at evangelism, and particularly looking at different people in our congregations who are gifted in sharing the gospel. And I want us to see that they're just everyday people just like me and you. And so we're going to learn from their experiences, hear from their experiences, and hopefully be encouraged to get out and share the gospel ourselves.
Last year, my husband Jeff and I were on a river cruise, and we met this lady, and she 3 or 4 times told us this very sad story about her life. You know, she had so much pain in her life and so much betrayal. And the day, in fact, it was the day before we got off the boat, I was sitting there talking with her, and I just suddenly had this desire to tell her the gospel. And I can still remember, it was, I don't know where the words came from, but they did come to me. I held her by the hand and I said, "Come walk with me." And I said to her, I said, "You're so lonely and you need so much love." And I said, "You need to meet Jesus, because when you meet Jesus, you will have the most wonderful love you can ever experience. You'll have a purpose and meaning for your life. You'll actually know where you're going, and you'll have a family of people to look after you." And she looked at me and she said, "Do you believe that?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "That's the most exciting thing I've ever heard." So that was what happened there.
So I just started a new job in the past couple of months, and I'm absolute bottom rung of the company, which is awesome because it means that, I don't know, I think it just gives a lot of freedom in terms of not trying to be the best or whatever, but I think it also comes with a lot of temptation to try and prove yourself. And I went for a walk with my friend at work, and one of the reasons I was really keen to go for a walk with her is one of my friends once told me that if you get a friendship out of the uni campus or out of the office, it becomes a real friendship. And I think real gospel opportunities come when you really love someone as a friend and you really invest in their friendship, and it's not just, hey, let's chat over our work. It's about much more than that. So we went for a walk around the gardens that are near our office, and we were just chatting about being newbies and young people and feeling the need to kind of prove ourselves. And one of the things I'd been wrestling with at the time was, I'm a child of God. God approves of me because of what Jesus has done. And I just shared that with her. I just said, actually, one of the freeing things about being a Christian is not feeling like I need to make sure the managing director sees all the work that I do, but actually I can just know that the creator of the universe loves me, approves of me because of not my good work, because of Jesus's good work. And I think that was quite flooring for her to hear, to share that with her. And it was, a really cool opportunity. And since then, we've had a couple of other conversations about Jesus. She's coming to a church thing in a couple of weeks to hear a bit more, because also God brought up another Christian in her life as well. And I'm really seeing him at work in her life. But that was really encouraging to just have that opportunity to share with her the hope for the everyday that Jesus gives us.
About a man I worked with about 2 years ago, and he's a man from mainland China. And he had told me that he had been to China, and his cousin, who was also visiting from San Francisco, was in China at the same time. And that he turns out his cousin had become a Christian. And he told Stephen, this man's name is, the story, and that kind of intrigued him a little bit. So he started reading the Bible because he just thought it was a Western. He was living in the West, so he thought he should read a book that's a Western book, so to speak, And so I met him maybe 2 years ago, and he was talking about, he amazed me how much he actually remembered of how much he understood. He was able to read the story of Joseph and then kind of connect it to Jesus. And I think, I've taken me years to make those connections, and he's done it in, I don't know, a very short amount of time. But anyway, he did come along here to church to one of the carol services, him and his wife, and it was a very positive experience. And then about 6 months ago, he sent me a text message to say that him and his wife had become Christians and had been baptized at some Chinese Western Sydney Chinese church or something like that. I don't know the exact name, but it was just lovely. He was a lovely man, but it was just lovely to see the God. I was only a small link in the chain, but it was just lovely to see the connections, all these little connections that came to fruition.
Actually, any other? Yeah.
Can I tell a couple of stories about that, being ready? Because I find it very difficult to prepare myself to speak to somebody. And so somebody taught me years ago that the thing to do is to be ready to speak. And God will bring you the opportunity rather than you go looking for it. And sometimes they come in the most unexpected way. I was talking with one man at work, and he was from a Jain background. And I asked him how he found living in a predominantly Christian country compared to the number of Jain in Australia. And he said, it's just wonderful to meet people who believe in something.
Yeah.
And away our conversation went. Now, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a turning away answer, but there it was. I had another experience of a work colleague coming in and just volunteering his concerns of the day to me. And I thought, I wonder why he came to me with that. Well, I know why he came to me with that. God pointed him. And my reply was, can I pray for you about that? And the answer was a short pause, and then yes. Now, just to be ready to answer is, I think, the first thing we need to do. If we're not that sort of outgoing person, that's what we need to be ready to do.
One friend called me up one day out of the blue and said, may I please come and ask you lots of questions? I cleared everything that day. I knew something was up and I was praying for her. And she came over and started asking me all sorts of eternal questions. It turns out that she knew to ask me because many years ago I'd given her a book, a Christian book, and she didn't bother to look at it. But inside it I'd also put a gospel thing with my name and number. And so when she wanted to ask questions, she rang me. So she's now become a Christian from our discussions. But it doesn't always happen like that where somebody actually reaches out to you.
No. That's true.
But quite often it happens when you're not really expecting things either. So another example would be when I've been in another country and there's a waitress who might serve us regularly or something like that, and I just get to know somebody and make conversation, teach them a bit of English, try and learn language, whatever. And so I made friends with the waitress and I said, do you want to go for coffee when you've got free time? And she said, not many people ask me to go to coffee, but we did that a couple of times and she told me a lot about her life. And during that time, she asked me about my life as well, and I could tell her that I was a Christian, but she said, I don't know much about that at all. And so I just said, do you want to know what Christians believe? And she said, yes. So I just got to tell her exactly in a nutshell what Christians believe and try and encourage her to, seek the Lord. Do I have time for one more? Okay. Well, one other lady I can think of, again, it was after listening to her for a very long time. I'd known her over many years and she'd gone from being quite anti, because I was on a beach mission, so she was very suspicious to begin with. But over the years we became friends and I listened to her and heard about her family, and she started to share things with me about the hurts in her life and her son who she was estranged from. And I said this time, do you want to hear a story that this reminds me of? And I told her the story of the prodigal son, but just in normal language, not in Bible language. I just shared about the love of the Father and how wonderful it was that his son had come home. And I said, as much as you'd love your son to come home, God's waiting for all of us to come home. And I think that rang true for her because of how much she loved her son. So those are three very different examples.
So my experience is a lot in the workplace, and people will just be talking about things, talking about issues, and they'll express a view, and I'll say, well, maybe that's not the only view, and there's another view, and what about this view? And then I'll say, why would you have that view? Where does that view come from? And I say, well, it's a biblical view, And they go, oh, do you really believe that? Why would you believe that? And I say, well, have you looked into it? Why don't you have a look into it? And then I say, then there might be a bit of a discussion about the particular thing. And I say, well, let's just put that issue to the side. Let's just look at Jesus. Let's look if there is a person called Jesus, did he exist? And what did he come to do? And have a look at that. And then once you get your head around that, then see what Jesus' view on that issue is. And so taking them to talks or courses or things like that. And it's pleasing in some ways that going to a course or a talk, how much it shifts their view. It doesn't necessarily mean they become a Christian, but it does after the course. They go, wow, I didn't realise that's what it was about. That's very different to my understanding of it. It doesn't mean they necessarily embrace it straight away, but it does change their views. So
God has his great plans and he's so good to include us in them. And I think that's what's so exciting about evangelism. Sounds so formal, but really it's just being there when God asks you to do something. And Callum could have just gone, nah, I'm too hard. I'm not going to the man rolling on the grass. But if you have that prompt from the Lord, instead of like thinking about it too much, just do it. I think that for me over the years has been a big thing, because naturally I'd be much more reserved type of personality, but because I love the Lord and because he nudges me all the time to do stuff, if you do it, then you get the joy and the privilege of being part of it. But if you go, no, and keep walking, then God will pick someone else to do it. And like, there's nothing better than that, like being part of that. And so, yeah, I think it's really exciting. It's exciting to be part of God's mission.
Absolutely.
I agree with you there. I actually, all the times I've shared the gospel, it hasn't been me walking up to do it. It has always been God prompting or somebody coming to me and asking questions. God knows who he has that he wants to save, and God puts those people on our hearts and we can pray for them, and he will create opportunities for us and he will give us the words to say. So, and I agree with Emily. I think it's the most wonderful privilege to be able to just work for God, just to actually do what he asked us to do. And I just think that's the best thing. It's wonderful.
Underneath every single story is a lot of prayer of God, please use me. God, please open doors. God, please, save my colleagues because I love them. I work with them. I know that they're valuable to you. I think that's something that I've been so blown away by, particularly in starting the job that I've just started. Is I prayed for a couple of things, but one of the big things I prayed for was that God would open a door. And actually the conversations I've had with this particular girl have happened on the same day as I've been meeting up with my CBD prayer group. We catch up every fortnight and just pray for opportunities in our office every fortnight. And every day we get another message saying, oh my gosh, God just opened this conversation with this friend. God did this, and God is just so incredible at answering these prayers. I'm like often floored. I'm like, surely not this quickly, or like, surely not this amazingly, but he does, and it's so wonderful. A huge part of evangelism is relying on God. He's the one who changes hearts.
And it's also encouraging, I think, that we can remember that we don't have to have a perfect gospel presentation. We don't have to seek people out. We don't have to change people's hearts. We have to just be ready, as the New Testament asks us, to have an answer for the hope that's in us. If we are ready, God will have someone ask you a question or present a situation. And so that's a much more manageable thing. I can say to myself, yeah, I can do that. I can do that as a shy person. And so I can be ready. And the other thing that I think is, for a long time I had a tension between, if I tell the gospel, I want to be the perfect evangelist, I want to do it well, and I want to be the right person to do it. But then I realised that the right person to spread the gospel is someone who isn't perfect, because that's why we need the gospel. And so there's that tension. Do I want to be the perfect person to do this? Yes. The perfect person is somebody who needed it, and that's what I am.
And one of the things that I heard amongst all of our stories was a deep love for Jesus. I think that's the foundation. It's the prayer, and it's also the love for Jesus, and knowing how foundational our faith is in our life, in guiding us in who we are and what we do, our purpose, our meaning, it's basically the basis for everything. He's the strength on which we stand. And so knowing that, you just want to share it with your friends and family. I mean, I sometimes look at people and I think, I'm really a bit nervous about sharing the gospel with you. And then I think, but the outcome could be that they never hear the gospel. And I don't, that's a big thing.
And I think off that, you'd agree with me then that if you are someone who does lack conviction, or you lack the confidence, or you just find it difficult in the moment to approach someone and bring up a gospel conversation, that the answer, one of the answers, and surely one of the biggest answers, is to go back to your Bible, read the big verses, the big ones where Jesus makes absolute truth claims, and ask yourself, am I convicted of that? Like, do I believe that? And the answer for Christians will be yes. But as you do it every day and every morning and pray in response to reading the Bible, as that conviction sits more and more on the top of your mind and the front of your mind, it'll outweigh worries, and it'll start outweighing the other things that often get crammed in, that get in the way, until I think, definitely not there yet, but until one day you will go out into the world, not as someone who worries, but who could just, as you said, is in love with the truth that Jesus says, and it'll come out. It'll be harder to stop it coming out, I believe. Yeah.
Another thing, picking up on something Callum said, introducing them to other Christian friends so that you've got kind of multiple points of contact, and also just different personalities, so connect with someone who you think that they might connect with, and so that you've got multiple points of contact, I've found really helpful as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard from a guy called Sam Chan, who's really awesome, is he talked about how belief is formed in community and how important it is, exactly what you're saying, for people to see lots of Christians in their lives so that they can see that it's not just one kind of isolated belief, but actually lots of people believe this, so there's a lot of validity to this, and it's worth checking out. Something I tried doing was hosting girls' wine and cheese nights for my friends. So I'd invite lots of people from different parts of my life so that people could get to know each other, so that if they ever came to church, they'd know, 5 other people who are Christians who they've had conversations with in a non-threatening setting. That was kind of the hope of bringing people together.
I have a little prayer thing, two. One is before I get out of bed in the morning, pretty much every day, I'll just talk to God and ask Him to use me whatever way. So the whole day is for Him. Whatever that might be, so I don't know what's going to happen. It's like the world's greatest adventure, because you don't know what's coming today. That's one. It's not always that dramatic, but, just being available and saying, Lord, put people in my path, give me opportunities, whatever you want. Another thing is that I have a couple of little WhatsApp groups that are quick, help me kind of WhatsApp groups. And so if I really want to pray for people in particular, I might say, sisters, can you please pray for me today? I'm meeting up with a friend who's maybe battling terminal cancer or something like that. Can you please just, pray for God's word, just come through me, and for opportunities, that sort of thing. So there's other people around supporting in prayer. And I think that's an easy way to do it if you don't have your regular meet up with a group.
Ellie spoke about hospitality, your wine and cheese night. We all eat 2 or 3 times a day, and it's a very comfortable way to meet people. And I find that sometimes to invite a few people to dinner and mix the friends together, friends from church or other Christian friends and neighbours and so on who aren't Christians, who can just meet a normal sort of person who happens to be a Christian. In the workplace years ago, I had a colleague who would always say, Christians are like this, and she'd have something negative to say. And I'd say, what about John? Oh, no, he's not like that. Oh, what about, what about me? Oh, no, you're not like that. What about Andrew? Oh, he's not like that. And I remember saying to her once, well, eventually you'll have met them all. You have to have something else to say. But it was that point of just discovering that people are normal. Your Christian friends are normal. Some of them like hiking, some of them like wine and cheese, some of them like sports, some of them like whatever normal people do. And I think that makes it safe for a friend to ask about the gospel, because they're not offering to become a missionary in darkest Africa, although they might want to go there. They might just turn out to be a normal person like those others they've now met. And food is one great way to do that, I think. When you run out of things to say, you can just have another feast.
I think the other the theme that came through amongst our group was how wonderful an opportunity it is to speak to people when they're hurting. You know, for example, your example, Shireen. And that reminds me of a story when I had only been a Christian for a very short time. And I actually have a New Age background. So I was brought up a Catholic, then I moved into New Age. And this girlfriend and I were really, really close. And then I became a Christian. And we managed to maintain our relationship very well. It was very respectful. But I never had the opportunity of telling her the gospel. And I knew it wasn't the right time to tell her. And anyway, she ended up with bowel cancer. And I was in hospital with her about 6 weeks before she passed away. And she said to me, which shocked me, she said, "Julia, I want to know all about Jesus," which I hadn't expected to have that. And her doctor had actually, he was a Catholic and he'd given her a relic and she had that with her. And she said, "I really need to know more." And I really didn't know how to tell the gospel then. And I was quite nervous because I knew her background and I knew the concept of sin would be something, well, I thought the concept of sin would be something she couldn't deal with. And I was quite nervous. And so I just opened my Bible up and I came to Psalm 95. Don't ask me why, it was God's leading. And I read through Psalm 95 with her and I explained the gospel through Psalm 95. And Psalm 95 has a verse in it that says, "If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart," as they did in Meribah. And then it goes on to talk about the sinfulness of the Israelites. And so I could actually tell her that. And I basically said to her, I said, "Sylvia, this is a message from God." I said, "He gave me this psalm for you today. And it's a time for you to work out where you stand." And then I did tell her the gospel and we did pray. And the most amazing thing is I finished praying to show her how to pray. And she just continued to pray. She had her eyes closed and she was praying and praying and praying. And I've got no doubt that she's in glory right now. But that was just an amazing opportunity. And it just came because she was hurting. And it just goes to show my weakness was I didn't really know where to start or how to go about it. And God led the whole way. It is awesome.
One of the things, if you don't know someone and you're in a crowd or a cocktail party or whatever, you don't know where to start. One of the things I found helpful, which you would ask anybody anyway, just to make conversation, is, "Oh, how was your week?" or "How was your day?" or "What do you usually get up? What are your hobbies?" And then the other one is, what do you usually get up to on a weekend? And if they say they do sport on Sunday, or if they say whatever, because usually they will say, "What do you do?" And then you can say, "Well, on Saturdays we do this, but on Sundays I go to church." And then they'll say, "Which church?" And then you go on from there. So that's a very normal conversation to have. What did you do on the weekend? Then you kind of might know whether they go to church or not, perhaps. That sort of a thing, yeah. But I think to get to know them and get them talking and listen and ask questions after you know that kind of thing is very helpful and just a normal path to follow, I think. And it's probably not threatening because they're talking on a subject that they know well. It's about them. So, yeah.
And I think I find that if you listen and ask questions, there'll often be in some kind of opening there somewhere for the gospel. And the question is, do I have the courage to take it? It's not, I can think of maybe what to say, but do I have the courage to actually say it is the challenge, I find. Yeah. And by the grace of God, he does give me the courage sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
I think the other thing, someone who once saw this diagram, which is kind of like a gospel spiral in terms of like how you get to gospel conversations. And on the outside is like, what are you eating for lunch? And on the inside is like, what do you believe about Jesus? And you kind of can't go from I'm having a salad wrap to Jesus is the Lord and Messiah. But you can go from kind of talking about what you did on the weekend and then why you... so I had a situation at work recently where I was working on a project to do with disability. We were discussing how how important it is for people who have disability to have dignity. And I was able to share, like, yeah, so why do you believe that they should have dignity? And then that person said, because it's, everyone's equal, that kind of thing. And I was able to share, well, I actually think God has made everyone in his image, and that's why they have dignity. So kind of working from a conversation which it's easier to get to the gospel from a conversation that actually has depth in what you value, where value comes from, than kind of a more surface level conversation, I guess. So trying to get to those questions and those conversations.
And I think on that, I think it's about building relationships and trust. I don't think you can have deep relationships unless you've built some level of trust. And often it takes maybe a couple of coffees or something like that to actually get that level of trust where you can start to have the deep conversations. And to be aware of where people are with their levels, whether they're willing to go deeper or not. So being aware of, where they're at and seeing the signals as to whether they want to go deeper and ask questions as well.
And with that, I've found that the relationships that have ended up going deep where I didn't reveal my faith or that I was a Christian earlier on, often it's harder to bring it up because it's something new. Whereas even if it's just in passing, that at the beginning of our friendship, I go to church, I've said that many a time. When the relationship does get deeper and I start speaking about what I learned at church, it's less of a shock to them, but also it's less of a shock for me to bring it up in the first place because I know it's nothing new. I know that the relationship where it's got to so far has been on the knowledge of that I have a faith and that one day that might come up in conversation. So it's really, I find it's really helpful now just to almost in every conversation, just in some way give some inclination in the conversation that I am a Christian, I do go to church, something along those lines. So that, as you say, as we invest and go down the line with our relationship, that it's easier to bring it up when the opportunity presents itself.
I think living authentically as a Christian is a very important first step because when you're younger, you can just launch into life discussions quite happily at university, etc. When you get to second half of life, some people are very guarded about religion. They may be atheist and they're staunch, or they may have come from some religious experience which has put them very much on guard. So all my friends know that I'm a Christian, but I treat them lovingly and I'm interested in them. And I think they're watching me because they're trying to figure out, is she real or not? And as time goes on and the friendship deepens, they open up and then the opportunities start to come. So it takes a while of people watching to see if you're actually believable or genuine and then when you speak, that's more powerful, I think. So I'm not saying that we should just live as a Christian and never say anything. I'm saying that live the genuine life, just shine the Lord, and they'll get curious, hopefully, and an opportunity will happen. And I found that to be true with a lot of people in my life.
Yeah, it's fair to say you're doing it wrong if you're not loving the person. I know I gave a talk on it, not because I'm good at memorizing the Bible, but at the end of Matthew 9, there's this idea that, Jesus sees a crowd and then it says his gut wrenched with agony, longing for them and a sadness and compassion for them. And then he sends his disciples out. And as someone who likes winning arguments, it took me many years to realize that the reason no one was really listening is because they didn't see any care. They just felt they were getting beat down by someone who likes to argue and prove a point. And so, I think you have to love them. That's the first step. It's not something you can choose to do or not. And links in the chain, as you said, grounds to be very confident and to never really despair, even over a bad experience or, you never know. And there's the parable that says you don't know, you go to sleep and then the seed grows fully. And an example of that is a girl came up to me recently who I led on a camp with. It was a camp I was doing the talks. And she said, you'll never guess, this girl said her name. She's like, she became a Christian. I was like, never heard that name before in my life. And it's because on camp, apparently, she showed no fruit. She listened. But 6 months later, she's become a Christian. And she said, I can see what that did in the lead up. I didn't listen fully, didn't give it my full attention, but it was crucial in what was to happen. And so, yeah, every opportunity is in the hands of a sovereign God, and you have to believe that because the Bible makes it very, very clear. So there's huge ground of confidence and not really much ground for immediate despair after a bad situation.
But you mentioned the idea of the stone in the shoe. I think, is that coming from Greg Kuckel's book?
is, yeah.
Which is very good because he talks about, we'd love to get the whole gospel across, but in most conversation we want to explain in detail so that people are clear about what the full message is. But he says his goal is a bit more modest. He says he just wants to leave people with something like a stone in your shoe that you walk away and they're not going to forget it easily, whether it's a question or a statement or something that will not niggle them, but something that they will take away and think about.
Well, I can remember being on a date with a man who was a Christian, and we were walking along the path to Manly, and I can distinctly remember him saying to me, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, who is God for you?" And I explained it. And he said, "Well, tell me, how do you know that?" Well, I was stumped because I couldn't actually give him an answer. And that's what led me to actually then investigate the Bible. And and probably within about 6 months, I'd become a Christian. Yeah, but it was just that one question. And it was the fact that he challenged the fact that what I thought was God was not God.
I went to school at a school where lots of people went to a camp run by a Christian organisation where the gospel was front and centre. But the camp had an activity that meant that I was keen to go even as not a Christian. But before even then, the friends that I had at school, there were two in particular who were Christians who had been in my life, and I just knew that they were Christians. So when I went to this camp, I heard the gospel and I thought, oh wow, this is so different to what I thought, kind of what you were saying before. And I must figure out whether Jesus is Lord. I knew exactly who to message and say, can I come to church with you? They brought me along to church, and then another leader actually from St. Thomas's who led me on that camp finally said to me after I'd gone to church for a little while, "Ellie, so how are you going with deciding on Jesus?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm just kind of on the fence." And she was like, "Okay, well, you better get off the fence because Jesus could come back tomorrow and you can't be on the fence." And I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is for real. And that challenge, she said it with a lot of love, and she'd built kind of rapport with me over a couple of months. But that was a good reminder. And then it wasn't until I went to schoolies and met other Christians who had volunteered there for the express purpose of loving people and sharing the gospel, where I was like, no, I want to become a Christian. And so there were lots of people in that link chain.
Yeah.
And then, but mostly in conversation, it's listening to the person and hearing the key parts of their life or their key concerns, being really intentional about listening and being sensitive, and then with that information, expressing the gospel in a way that makes sense to them. Yeah. So, somebody who is battling illness, the direction might be about a sickness that none of us can actually cure, and Jesus has come to make us well, spiritually well. Or, if you are a lawyer, you've got your legal sort of approach. Or if you're talking to a surfer, you've got somebody who knows near drowning and being plucked out. Or if you're artistic, there's all these different approaches, or relationship breakdowns, or, I think it's more, for me, it's been more listening and then thinking, okay, how can I express all of those key elements, but in a way that this person understands? Yeah. So it's very specific to the person.
I was speaking to somebody at a church on Sunday, and she disclosed that she's probably a woman in her 80s, and she disclosed to me that she was somebody that had fallen away from church, and she'd come back, but she really wasn't quite sure. And I just shared the story with her of the man that went into the field and found the treasure, and then covered it up, raced away, sold everything he had and bought the field. And she looked at me and she said, "I don't have that." She said, "You have that, but I don't have that." But that was the stone in the shoe, because hopefully she will go away and think about that. So it was just a short conversation, but it was just a short story out of the Bible. So, because I think it is the greatest treasure.
An image I really relate to, and I guess you could call it a story, is Just the whole biblical use of the word light and Jesus being the light. I personally have found that people are quite open to seeing the darkness in the world, just in how we squabble over things, how the world is very fickle, how governments just never seem to be able to get it right. And we just seem, I think that the image of someone grasping in the darkness, not being able to see the full picture, but trying to do their best way to get across a room with many objects or something. I think it's quite evident in the world. I think people would agree, even if they don't agree on the next part of the story, which is essentially Jesus comes in and says, I have all the answers, I'll flick on the light, I'll explain why suffering exists, I'll explain why we can't work out peace on earth, there's no utopia coming in the future. And I think just that idea of contrasting a world that's searching, and I think most people would agree, stumbling and even failing, versus, I guess, the worldview that Jesus then brings and puts on the table and says, this is the light flicking on, this will help you understand everything. I've found I've found there's a lot of agreement when you tell a story like that. Yeah.
I think, tonight we've heard a lot of stories of like long-term relationships or relationships in the workplace. But I think, we're also called to just share the gospel where we have opportunity, and it might not be, it might be someone we see for one moment, and that's it, that's the opportunity that God gives us. And a couple of weekends ago, I was at an outreach event that a church was running, in alignment with Mardi Gras during Sydney, and the whole purpose of the event was to show people Jesus' love during this event where perhaps people may not have understood the love of Christ before. And I was chatting to a guy who he just shared with me like that he had been really hurt by people who'd called themselves Christians, and that because of his sexuality he had been ostracised by his school that was a Christian school, or kind of around that idea of Christianity. And I just listened to a story for a long time, and then I just asked him if I could share with him a story that I'd read earlier in the night, and I literally just prayed that God would, I just was like, I need to have a story about Jesus' life ready to go in case someone needs it. And as it happened, God allowed this to happen, like allowed this conversation to be where I could share this. And I shared the story of the Samaritan woman who was a woman who was ostracised by everyone in her society, so much so that she had to go to the well at a time where no one else was there. And Jesus didn't avoid her. He went out of his way to seek her out, and to show her his love, and to give her the opportunity to know him as Lord and Saviour. I shared that story with him, and I think he was probably quite floored at the kind of love that Jesus had shown this woman, because he had not been shown that love by other people. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, I've got to go, but that thing in your hand, which was a tract, can I have it? And I was like, sure. Like, I didn't even offer it to him originally. So just being able to, I guess I'm learning a little bit more that maybe Jesus has the best stories. Jesus' life is the best story to tell, rather than I think my temptation is to think I've got to have something clever up my sleeve or some sort of thing, but really just reading the Bible and sharing with people what we've just read and what Jesus has done in the everyday and how he interacts with people can be super powerful. It's the word of God.
It'd be good to hear, because we're not always gung-ho evangelists. What kind of challenges or fears, things like that, do you have with evangelism?
I fear that I won't have exactly the right words for this person that I'm talking to. And I realise that the story I know best is about myself. So I can say to them why I'm a Christian. And people can make the analogy themselves. And so we don't have to do that thinking for them, and we don't have to do the convincing for them either, because God does that.
Yeah.
I'm just a massive people pleaser. Like, I hate it when people are annoyed at me or feel uncomfortable in a situation because I want to make them feel like, everything's great. But that's a fear. That's my biggest fear, is that I'm going to annoy a friend or a colleague or whatever by having this gospel conversation with them. And the dialogue and the prayer that I have to go in with is, this is literally the best thing I could ever share with this person. And if I think back to before I was a Christian, man, I'm so thankful that people stepped out of their comfort zone to share the gospel with me, because I would not be a daughter of God today had they not done that. And I just have to remember that every time I go into a conversation that I'm fearful about. And the other thing I guess I'm a bit fearful is I do talk quite a lot. And I want to always make sure that there's space for people to contemplate and not for me just to download everything onto them without them having an opportunity to think about it. So something I pray quite a lot is, God, prompt me when to speak and help me to listen well. We just need God's help in literally everything. And we really need his help in sharing the gospel with people, but also knowing when to listen to them. So I ask for his help in that, and that helps me be less fearful, because I know I'm going into this covered in his prayer. And actually, Callum, just a little plug for our pre-5 p.m. prayer thing that we've got going on. I've loved we pray before 5 p.m. for about half an hour before we go into the service. And one of the big things we're praying for at the moment is people to become Christians and people to come into the church and who don't know Jesus. And praise the Lord, he's been answering these prayers in droves, which is amazing. But I feel so much more, not confident in myself, but confident walking into church on a Sunday. I'm not anxious about who can I talk to, who can I make sure is okay, because I know that God has covered it all. So it's super freeing going into a situation when we've prayed about it, because God is the one making it happen.
The fear of, fear of rejection, but also sort of a fear that you might not see the answer. Like they might say no, or if you invite them to something, they might say, oh, no, that's not for me. And then you feel really sad. But you've got to remember that they're not saying that to you. It's not a personal attack. And that you're always you're just the messenger, right? You're not the one who's going to change hearts. So we have to do that. And even if they say no, we can't come or whatever, that's fine. And you have to. It's just part of what it is. Not everyone's going to be able to. But then the other thing I find is that you have to be with love and kindness and sincerity. Ask them again and again and again. So that loving persistence, I think, can be also a bit scary, because you think, oh, am I annoying them again? But then on the funny side, they might actually say yes to you just to get rid of you. So,
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the fear is probably damaging the relationship you have with the person. But then when you think about it more, what's more loving, to tell them about something really important or to not for the sake of the relationship? Because I often think, well, then maybe they'll, hopefully hear the gospel and they'll go, why didn't you tell me all this time we spent together? And you tell me what we were doing. So,
A bit of a different one that I think I've experienced is often an obstacle is, for want of a better word, laziness, in just how much effort I know when you go out to evangelize, when you go into deep conversations, you could be opening up very messy stories and lives. Often, you need to invest in a person before you can start talking about the things that you want to talk to. And as someone who goes to uni and you see countless amounts of faces rushing around, it seems like a daunting amount of effort to start those conversations, to then know that I need to continue those conversations next week's lecture, next week's tutorial, next week's. And so I think, I'm sure people would be like, well, you need to be well rested, you need to make sure you have the energy. But something that I said earlier I found is you just need to be convinced of the urgency. I think you need to see that it's worth the effort, that that work and toil that you do is essentially work and toil for eternity, which I don't think you can apply to any other work in life. So just letting the Bible and Jesus just convince me that it's worth my whole life, it's worth all my effort. Otherwise, it just looks like too much, and I'd much rather walk around quietly, as I said, keep my eyes on the ground. And so yeah, that's an obstacle that I've prayed a lot that God would overcome in me and just change my heart to someone who isn't scared of that work. Yeah.
I think about God placing each one of us in a small circle, like you're in, that's your closest, and then maybe another ring that is a little bit wider circle.
Yeah.
It is overwhelming if you look at the whole world. I find it overwhelming even sitting in the city. Or getting a train, I just think, oh, there's so many people. But if God's put you in this special circle, that's my primary focus, to really love them for the long term. And then the day-to-day is who God puts in along the path. And I'm not going to be carrying on with them for many more decades. I may add some into the inner circle or whatever, but when I look at that, then I can just be faithful to what God has put before me. And it's just this and a few others. So, yeah, that's how I look at it.
Someone put to me years ago the suggestion, you should go and join a couple of community groups. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, people there are conscious that they want their life to be purposeful. They said, you'll have great conversations. And they were right. So that's one I would recommend. Maybe it doesn't matter quite so much when you're 23, but when you're 56, you don't meet quite so many people day by day. And so sometimes you have to be intentional about it. Worry about being rejected all the time. The number of times it's happened, I could count on my hands, but I get to worry about it a lot. But what you've just told me is that it doesn't actually matter when it happens anyway.
No, I don't think it does. I mean, because it's God's work. He's the one who transforms hearts. It's not actually me. All I is his mouthpiece. I'm somebody actually sharing his love with them. But it's actually the Holy Spirit that actually makes the changes, and it's his work. So when I put it in that context, I don't, if I get rejected, it doesn't really matter. If I was rejected in other things, I would really be upset.
It really is on a spectrum. Like, it depends on how much of a relationship I have with the person.
Yeah.
And if they're someone off the street, like, I still care about them and I still know that God loves them. But their rejection I don't feel as strongly as when I ask a family member, will you come to pop-up church? I'd love you to hear about Jesus, and they say no. And I feel that like a ton of bricks because I love them so much and I want them so much to know Jesus. And it's been, and I'm sure all of you feel this way, like it's been years of wrestling with God, being like, God, I trust you. You're wonderful. You know what you're doing, and I need your help to keep trusting you with their salvation. So I think the rejection for me is less so about, I think most of the time it's less so about, I kind of have that opinion as well, Julia, but it's really, I feel the weight of salvation, and it's a real spiritual battle, and we really need God's help to keep trusting him with people's souls, because he saved us, he's going to save others, and it's up to him.
Tim, you do a lot of walk-up evangelism, so sharing the gospel with strangers on the street. You'd get rejected a lot in that. How do you put that in perspective? And
because I remember one day I went to 9 different people in a row, and each time there was a no, and I'm thinking, gosh, is it me? What have I started really worrying, thinking, is it my approach? Am I saying the wrong thing? Am I coming across all wrong? Am I just, I don't know. You start doubting yourself. You think, what? I just learned to persevere, I think. I just keep going. And I often find that if I just keep going, then a good conversation does come along, and not long afterwards, But, as long as I know, I think as long as I haven't, like Ben said, that I haven't stuffed it up or said something stupid or just come across arrogantly or whatever, then I can handle it, as long as I know that because Jesus did say that we would experience a certain amount of rejection from the world because the message is challenging. Yeah. So you kind of expect a certain amount, and And that, so I just find perseverance. I just persevere.
So what do you say when you stop people on the street? Or do you stop them, or you stand on a street corner, or how do you do it?
No, just I would approach, say, men, for example, a guy sitting by himself in a park.
Oh, okay.
And I would just introduce myself, say who I am, and say what I'm doing. And I'm just walking around, just talking about some of the big questions of life, or about what's the purpose of our lives, or do you ever think what may happen when you die, or do you ever think, is there a God, or is this world just, where do you think it came from, or stuff like that, and just see where the conversation goes from there. Most people have an opinion of some sort. Some people say they never think about these things, but I think most people do. And I just go from there, really, and try to answer the questions and try and leave people with the gospel. I think if someone walks away with the gospel and say that they will read it, then I think that's great. That's success, I find. Yeah.
We're coming towards the end of our time, and you guys have been awesome. We'll do a last burst of energy. I think kind of closing tips, like things we haven't covered, tips or encouragements, things you'd like to say to the congregation to encourage them in evangelism.
I'll go first. I know what I want to say. To the 5 p.m. congregation, I would say, come to the prayer meeting. I know, that's probably a broken record and it's on Facebook every week. But the reason I started it was because I looked at what God wants us to do and said, that's impossible. It really is to reach the nations with a message that they think is ridiculous, that I sometimes need to be reminded of how good it is. That's an impossible task. And so I was like, well, what do I do? And the only answer I could think of is pray and pray more. And the idea of Spurgeon's boiler room, where he said the only reason my ministry is the way it is because I have this room full of 200 people who are praying before, during, and after the service. If you believe the Bible, you have to believe that prayer is powerful. It's real. It does change the world, and it does change minds. And it's what God wants us to start with, I believe. Come to the prayer meeting so that we might evangelize well and effectively. And there's a prayer meeting for every congregation, I believe. So,
I think my big encouragement would be to do evangelism in community. Be the friend who, when your friend brings a non-Christian family member to church, you go sit with them. Be the friend who, when there's a bunch of Christians and there's a person who doesn't know Jesus, you step out of that circle and go speak to that person. And as you are that friend, other people will be that friend to you. We need to do this together. We are so weak. We need God's Spirit. And as you look at the Bible, you see them constantly sending people out in twos. You see letters going back in between churches being pray for these people, pray for these people. We just have the Facebook message version of that these days. Be that person. I have friends who I text and say, hey, this person's coming to this event. Can you please make sure you're there so that you can talk to them about this, and they will feel comfortable and feel loved and feel like they know people. I actually did that to Emily the other day. I said, my mum's coming to wine and cheese night, so can you please come and say hi? Because I want her to see that Christians are not just 24 years old, but they are all ages, all life stages, and Emily can relate to my mum as a mum herself. So be that friend and ask other people to be that friend for you as well.
I'd say keep your eyes on the Lord and not on yourself. I'm always encouraged that God chooses the weak to shame the wise. So none of us are really without excuse.
We're all weak, you mean?
Well, I am.
Yeah.
I feel it all the time. So it's an encouragement to me.
I think there's a verse in, is it Philemon? It says, be active in sharing your faith so that you will have a good understanding of every good thing we have in Christ. The idea that it's such a blessing when we share the gospel, because it's such a blessing. I find it such a blessing. So the idea that as we share and give out, God, if you like, replenishes us and gives us insight and understanding of things. I just find that such a blessing. So I think, be active in sharing your faith so that you will have a good understanding of every good thing we have in Christ.
I think it's about just going out there and trying it and doing it. And each time you try it, walk home, when you go home, just think about how did it go, what went well, what didn't go well, what would I do next time that might be different, could I have told a different story, or did I listen well enough? And then that'll just prepare you for the next time. And so the next time you've got that much more knowledge and that much more confidence behind you that you can go and do the next time and the next time. So it's just a continuous learning cycle. And as you do that, you will become better and better at doing it. So I think it's with prayer and in God's strength, doing the best you can and actually taking it as an opportunity to learn and grow and evangelise through that.
For me, it's about priorities. So there's nothing more important you can share with people in the gospel, and just constantly reminding yourself about that constantly. And then because of that, just making opportunities to do it. And so just moving up your priorities, and then telling people they need to move it up their priority list as well when they're talking to you. So often people dismiss you and say, oh, I'll think about it later, I'll think about it later. And just go, you don't know what's going to happen. You need to deal with it now.
Yeah, I think always remembering that you're the messenger, and it's not you that changes hearts. So that's very comforting. So the fear factor perhaps can be lessened. And the other exciting thing is with rejection. Remember, I call our God the upside down God, because what he doesn't do here, he'll do somewhere else in the most unexpected ways. So there's always that great excitement, expectation, what's going to happen. So don't give up is what I'm saying. Just keep with prayer and with God's strength. He will make it right somewhere, maybe not in your time frame, but when he sees it's the right time, his time.
I want to say thank you, everyone, for sharing your experiences and sharing your wisdom and just encouraging us in evangelism. Thank you so much. So you know where we're heading for the next few weeks. We've got a whole program on evangelism coming up, and next week we'll be looking at how to start a gospel conversation. And so I hope that you can take what we talked about today and talk about it over church in discipleship group and encourage one another to get out and share the gospel.